At what level does more income stop buying more happiness? With wealth and income, is more an unmitigated good? Leaving aside those who have taken a voluntary vow of poverty, how much is enough? What if you defined a pair of financial finish lines, one for income and another for wealth? What would you do with the surplus? Would that mean you'd stop working, or at least stop earning? Or just stop retaining? What would that do for your marriage, your family, your friendships, your legacy, your joy from life? Today we look at the studies, share some stories, highlight a book, and offer 4 powerful questions. All that and more right now on the Retirement Lifestyle Show.
Welcome to the Retirement Lifestyle Show. I'm one of your co-hosts, Adrian Nicholson, and I'm joined today with Erik Olson. Erik, it's great to see you today. I'm very excited for the episode that we have today. It's been a really good start to the morning. We're starting a little bit earlier than we normally do. I normally sleep in pretty late, but we're getting this podcast rolling a little bit early today, and I'm very excited. I'm very excited to be joined here by Erik today. Erik, how have you been? I know you're probably very excited that baseball season's starting back up again. How's everything been on your end?
Oh my goodness. So yesterday was opening day, at least for my team, the Padres, and they won, although it was a slugfest. So it was something they pulled out by 1 run. Their ace pitcher gave up 7 runs in 4 2/3 innings. So I was a little freaked out about that, but they won the game, so I'm okay with that.
That's always great when your team wins their first game of the season. You can always say we're undefeated.
That's right.
Always
we're
excited.
Undefeated.
That is great. Yeah, it's exciting that baseball's back. I can't wait to catch a couple games. The March Madness tournament has been really fun to watch. It's just been everything's been pretty good just to see sports back. So everything's been good on my end. Erik, are you excited, or do you have any plans this coming weekend?
Well, yeah. So this is Easter weekend, and so although it's been usually the case that we are not spending time with family now that my wife and I are both vaccinated, and our daughter's in town who's quite young. We're going to go ahead and get together on Easter Sunday, so we're pumped about that. How about you?
Yeah, that's exciting. We did a little bit of Easter celebration last weekend. I saw my family, and I golfed a little bit, so that was exciting. But nothing too planned this weekend. But I'm sure I'm going to be FaceTiming and calling a lot of my family just to catch up, just to catch up with them. So I'm excited. Everything's been pretty solid on my end. Again, like I said, I'm excited to do another podcast recording. I'm glad we got another episode out before a little bit of a longer weekend. But yep, everything's been good on my end. So it's good to hear from you, Erik, and I can lead us in today's topic. I'm really excited about today's topic. The kind of overall theme and concept we're going to be talking about today is financial finish line. And I think this is a great topic to discuss on the Retirement Lifestyle Show. It's, again, financial finish line. We're going to touch on concepts of how much is enough, thinking not only about the financial aspect of it, but the value aspect of it, the overall underlying meanings of it, the behaviors, the social, cultural implications that come along with it. I think it's going to be a really good and thought-provoking conversation to have with you, Erik. So I'm really excited to have this discussion. So before we just really dive deep into it, Erik, what's the first thing that comes to mind when I talk about financial finish line?
Well, it's a concept that at least the concept was introduced to me through a book written by these 2 guys that were Harvard MBA students and graduates, and John Cortines and Greg Baumer, and they wrote a book, and this book was God and Money, and it's the subtitle I don't remember, but it was something to the effect of how they processed the whole question of wealth while at Harvard Business School, and the concept that they came up with, or at least that they formed in this particular way, was about having both an income finish line and a wealth finish line. And the motivation in their case was that they saw the grip that money had on their hearts at a very early age, and how their aspirations were for more and more and more. As a matter of fact, they cite this one story that's told by a fellow named Mitch Anthony. Mitch Anthony is a well-known advisor to financial advisors. Honestly, he's just fantastic at developing really thought-provoking questions about all aspects of life. And one of the questions, or one of the stories that he told, was that he was dealing with these, various very wealthy people, and was asking them how much was enough. And the people who had 50 million were saying 100 million. And the people that were saying 100 million were saying 200 million. And it went on from there. And it wasn't until he was around people that had $200 million who were finally able to acknowledge that yes, they were pretty wealthy. And so he realized there is something about the way in which, in the absence of a finish line, we keep wanting more. Rockefeller was asked how much was enough, and he said, just a little bit more.
Erik, I had that quote too, and I was gonna mention it. Yeah, John D. Rockefeller saying that.
Yes.
One of the most prominent figures in the oil industry, one of the most wealthiest people in America, said, how much is enough? And was asked how much was enough, and he said a little bit more. And that's just, if you can wrap your head around that concept, he's a very wealthy man, and he still needed a little bit more. I think that really puts it in perspective. And I like that reference tool, or that book that you talked about, Erik, too. I think that's a really good source. And I kind of been looking at the concept a lot, and it's kind of been seeing a lot in other like cultural elements in our society, like TV shows and movies, where they're all kind of looking at the audience, telling the audience that more is better. And there's this new concept that's coming out saying that there's this never satisfied culture coming into play nowadays, where more is better, get more, work more, do everything you can just to it's also a protection and security element as well, where people see I need to generate more income, I need to consolidate my assets, I need to manage it more, I need to just keep increasing it, because the future sometimes is unknown. But like we mentioned, or a theme that we might touch on today, but if you're always in this constant state of looking towards the future, there's always so much uncertainty. So I need to push myself now, today, to make as much as I can. What can I do today? It can kind of create this give-take relationship, where if you have these goals, these financial finish lines set in place, it can give you a way to measure it, so you can lead to more contentment, you can lead to more certainty, you can feel a little bit more secure. So I think that's an interesting thing that we might touch on or go around a little bit today. So I think that's really good. And another concept I think we should talk about, and I think that would be interesting to kind of lay down the foundation for this episode, is, and you touched on a little bit, but this concept may be new to our listeners, is absolute versus relative wealth. Would you be able to go into that a little bit more for our listeners today, Erik? I'm sure they would like to know the distinction and difference between the two.
Sure. Well, I guess at one level you could say, using that story that we were telling just a minute ago, the couple that has $100 million would they be happy if they were surrounded by people, all of the people that they knew in their social circles had net worth of 50 million? I imagine that they'd probably feel like they're distinctively wealthy. But if they were surrounded instead by neighbors who are all at a $200 million level or higher, would they somehow feel like they were slumming it, or that they were failures? And so it's interesting sometimes just to think, what sorts of metrics have I set up around myself that lead me to serve as the milestones by which I self-evaluate. And so I think it's useful, instead of to think about it in relative terms, to come back and stop and take a breath and just ask, okay, in absolute terms, how much is enough, both on the income and on the wealth side?
Yeah, that's a really great point, Eric, and it can really show you how your own personal experiences in life can kind of lead to you picking that number or kind of searching for that number that would be right for you. I think that's really important. And also your network, the people you associate with, the people that you see every day, the people that you work with every day, can also be a big influence. Sometimes in cases it can be a big influence, sometimes it may not. But those experiences and those people that you are with every single day can lead you to creating these kind of numbers in your head or these goals in mind that you work to every day. Also, when you're in the kind of beginning of accumulating a lot of money, or you're working, or whatever it may be, in that early stage too, I feel like that's a very important stage where it kind of can lead you in the future to determine, have I made enough already? Do I need to keep working more? Do I need to be doing X, Y, Z, or should I be doing A, B, C now? It's just a constant thing that kind of calls for self-reflection sometimes, or kind of taking a look back. I know one thing that we part of our practice is making sure that you have enough assets to last your lifetime, and I think that's a good conversation to always have, and I think that's a good starting point, because again, we're kind of consolidating, we're kind of taking a stop. We're stopping you right then and there and saying, all right, let's see where you're at now, and let's see how that can translate to the future. So we take a look at all your assets, we take a look at your income, we take a look at your risk capacity, your risk tolerance, we take a whole bunch of look at your numbers and your kind of financial picture, and we kind of run certain scenarios and probabilities to see how this will affect your future and how much you'll have in your future. And I think that's a very good point to kind of create a number or a measurement in place, so you're not always just to the grindstone, constantly working, have that kind of arbitrary number in the back of your mind, where now you're kind of seeing a scenario laid out in front of you. You're seeing all the probabilities, all the different outcomes, and it's saying that it's giving you a certain input and you're getting a certain output, and you can make adjustments along the way. And that's why we always say we like to review your financial plan every year or so, because there are going to be changes in your lifestyle. There's going to be changes that come up in your life, and that's a good way to look at your old measurements and adjust and fine-tune it along the way, so you can have some type of goal or end game in mind. I think is very beneficial.
So I think about this, when we have this conversation, most of the time, Adrian, you and I and people in our business are very much focused on those technical aspects. And it's important that we have skill in the technical aspects of financial planning, because to a large extent, our clients are not first and foremost looking to us for philosophical guidance. They are really looking to us for some pretty solid, objectively defensible answers.
What are the numbers? We just want to see the numbers, the answers.
Yeah. But at the same time, I do think you and I are so, I think, sometimes absorbed with those numbers that in the process and the technical process, that I think it's useful for even us to step back from all of this. The business that we're in is one, like a lot of the careers and businesses that our clients are in, that have been good to us, right? I mean, this is we're people in this profession. It's not uncommon to wind up with having made a good living and been able to accumulate some wealth. And normally the clients that we serve are in that same position. So it's one, I think these questions are useful for us as advisors to consider for ourselves first, so that we can then have a similar sort of conversation with our clients. And I know that just the way in which the question or the conversation with clients has sometimes gone has been mostly, well, what does this conversation do for me? And so I do want to address this from the standpoint, initially at least, of in what way is this germane to each of us, as opposed to to something beyond us or outside of us. So there's been some studies that have looked at whether what is enough income. Let's start with income rather than wealth. What is enough income to assure one of at least a sense of well-being? And so there have been several studies, and there's been, I would say, some conflicting answers coming out of these studies. And I've looked at some of the nature of the studies themselves and the methodology that they used. But Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton in 2010 published a study, and that was based on this really large study that had come out of some Good Housekeeping data. And they found that people's reported well-being reached more or less its limit at $75,000. That was in 2010 dollars. So if you were having this conversation in 2021, that would be about $92,000. Now there's a different measure of happiness beyond just well-being, and it's what they termed life evaluation. So if I look at myself and I step back, irrespective of my moment-by-moment feelings of well-being, and I just appraise my life, how do I look at it at various income levels? And in that case, as income rises, they found that life evaluation did continue to rise past that point. Other studies that have been done at an international level have found similar results, although there was one that was released at the end of 2020, early 2021, that said, no, we were using this little smartphone-based app, and we asked people we randomly pinged them and said, just right now, tap, are you happy or are you unhappy?
And Erik, real quick before you get too much in the research, and I really like this this kind of area that you're talking about, kind of appraising your life. I think that's really interesting, and there's got to be a number of different ways you're doing this. But I feel like for that research, if you got like a message saying, "Oh, are you happy? Or are you sad right now?" and you're going to research, you're going to be like, "Oh, I'm relatively happy, I guess." So I'll go with that. But I like that, like kind of appraising your life. I think that's an important thing to do, just constantly that self-reflection, kind of looking in the mirror, constantly checking up on yourself, because you can always get so caught up in the lifestyle you're in or the work that you're doing where you're not taking the time to do that. So I think that's in a really important area as well. But please continue. I mean, it's a really interesting study.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting. Another study was done by some researchers at Harvard. They started it in 1938, and they started tracking, I think it was 250 or so, give or take, males who were students at Harvard, and I think it was at Harvard Business School, but it might have just been Harvard. In any case, they followed them over 80 years, and as they started doing that, the process that expanded and expanded and expanded, and they started then doing the wives and families of these men, and then they also started saying, well, why are we doing this strictly with these sort of high achievers who are Harvard students? What if we, Harvard students and Harvard graduates, what if we went into some areas of the Boston area where people are living, at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, and follow them? And what the interesting thing that they found was they were taking, Adrian, they were taking measurements of people's cranial size and all sorts of measurements of just physical. They were just trying to figure out what would contribute to happiness. And you know what they found? In the end, overwhelmingly, it had to do with relationships.
Wow. I believe that. Now that you say that, that is really interesting.
So at age 50, the quality of your relationships, they found, was a far stronger predictor of whether or not you would be healthy in your 80s than how much wealth you had or just about anything else. And so it was all about relationships. In fact, this one fellow, and I'm trying to remember, Waldinger, I think is his name, did a TED Talk. This been viewed 37 million times so far. And this TED Talk is about essentially on happiness, the longest study of happiness that's ever been done. So in the show notes, we'll put the link to that particular TED Talk, and people can think about that. So in other words, it wasn't wealth It wasn't income. It was relationships. So listeners, work on that marriage. If you're in a marriage right now, work on that marriage.
That's a great point, Erik, and I really enjoy that study. And I think relationships are a big aspect of this too. And it kind of shows how important the journey is to the finish line. Because, for example, you could be making your income could be very, very high right now, but you could be putting in a extreme amount of hours, and that might affect some relationships that you have, or in turn creating new relationships that are strong and healthy for the future, or that might take away from some of the passions or hobbies or whatever it may have in your lifetime. So that's why it's one of the biggest things coming out of school, one of the biggest things coming out of college is the work-life balance. That was always a very big thing. Work-life balance. Are you getting fulfillment? Are you getting happiness? Are you getting time to do not only getting your work done, your job, but also being able to implement that in your own life outside of work is an extremely important aspect. So yes, I'm using the cliche, sometimes the journey is more important than the finish line, but they kind of go hand in hand. It's important to have a goal-setting mentality. It's important to have certain measures and to be able to look forward to the future. So as days and weeks go by, you can kind of look back and self-reflect and reevaluate or adjust, whatever it may be. It's extremely important. But also your relationships are a very big aspect of your life. And, humans are social creatures. We need those certain relationships to help motivate us or support us, especially when it comes to the accumulation phase or you're starting a new career field or whatever it may be. Those are really important aspects to help you progress or go farther in them. And sometimes that might not be the case, but it's always good to have certain references or mentors or whatever it may be, or a spouse that you can constantly, or maybe that they can point out some things that could help you along the way, or whatever it may be. I think is really important. But that goal setting mentality and those relationships that can help you get there, that can go hand in hand. That can be also a great element. What do you think, Erik?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. So I wanted to come back to the topic of the finish lines themselves and give our listeners a sort of a peek into the reflection that these two authors that I mentioned, John Courtines and Greg Baumer, what sort of reflections they did on this subject. And they're not alone in this, but in I think in a ballpark way, they're not asking people or they're not inviting people to look at their lives and necessarily take a Franciscan vow of poverty. That's not what they're asking. It's what I think what they're inviting people to do is to think about, if you could say, I'm going to work and I'm going to build wealth to a certain point, what would that point be? And then once I've reached that point, then what would I do with it beyond that? Would I stop working and then start, or at least stop working in a way that earns at a comparable level, and then instead turn my energies to something else that I've wanted to do that I think has high social value but may not have the same high economic value? Or maybe it is to continue in something that has a high economic value, but then just be freed inside to give as much of that as possible away. So the ballpark numbers that they came up with were that on an after-tax, after-savings basis, after-tax, after-savings, so how much are you spending on lifestyle? Somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 a year. Now, some of our listeners may be thinking, what? That sounds really well off. And I would say that is really well off. That is actually really, really well off. At the same time, this is a conversation, I think, where they were challenging, or at least, again, I'm using the word inviting a lot of their peers who are coming out of the framework from which they graduated, where they would be immediately going into careers that could easily lead to multiples of that spending. And then on the wealth side, they and they're not prescribing an answer. They're just explaining how they arrived at their answer. On the wealth side, their finish line would be somewhere between typically $1 and $3 million. And of course, that would adjust with inflation. So I think they're recognizing that in today's environment with relatively low interest rates, $1 million doesn't generate the same sort of income that it once did, right? In a world of a 10-year treasury paying 7 or 8% per year, that's one thing. When it's paying 1.5% per year, that's a different thing. So, but somewhere in that $1 to $3 million of net worth. And if you're in a position, and I think the younger you are, the more germane this kind of question is. If you're sort of able to set your sights on what it is that you want to build toward, and you can say, you know what, I am going to commit on an inflation-adjusted basis to be somewhere in that area. And of course, that's going to be affected as well by the cost of living where you live and so forth. But if you could set that up and then just make that a target, what would you do? What would you do with the surplus as your wealth built beyond that level or your income built beyond that level? So, with this, I guess I would say that there's the question then so far that I've been addressing is what sort of impact does this have on you? But I also would say, what kind of impact could this have beyond you? And so there's the question of what impact could my giving or my wealth have on others, or my investing? What impact might my investing beyond those limits have if I focused it on what we've called impact investing, or if I focused it instead on what we've called we've called it socially responsible investing or faith-based investing? What sorts of contributions to human flourishing could this do? So I wanted to give you a little insight into a few of the questions that I found being asked out there that I think help with this question. So this is 4 questions to help you set a financial finish line, and this was published on the National Christian Foundation website by Sheila Dollinger in November of 2020. And so what she said was these 4 questions. Number 1, why have I been entrusted with these resources? And what is said differently, what is the purpose of my wealth? Second question, how much is enough for my family and me? And this is something that you could certainly have as a family conversation. One story in here is about a fellow named Larry Burkett, who was a noted author and writer. And his royalties were such from the books that he had written. Before he'd passed away, one year he had $800,000 in royalties, which he just said, you know what, I'm just going to give that away, because he had already reached his annual income finish line. So number 3, how much should I give to the next steward of this wealth? So in other words, if my children or my grandchildren are going to inherit what I have, or at least a portion of what I have, what is the right amount for them? And by the way, that question might be one which is dependent in not on just some sort of overarching philosophical principle, but on the specifics of who your children are. What kind of heart do they have? Would this be of help to them, or would it be in some ways even damaging to them? And then a 4th question is, should I give now or later? And so that might be, again, it's ongoing giving or as a bequest at the end. So,
yeah, Erik, I really like those points that you brought up. And again, that shows how important financial finish lines are, because it's a way, again, you measure, and once you are getting there or you're close there, it can make you look at other aspects of your life or other passions of your life that you might not have as much time as you do now for it. But now that you've reached a certain milestone, it can have you ask these questions or look into it more, whether it's giving or your values, or when it comes to passing that money down, where is it going? I think that's why these measurements are extremely important, again, because it can reawaken other aspects of your life that are going to be very important when it comes to your wealth. And I think that those are some really great points that you brought up.
Yeah, well, thank you. So, Adrian, I guess one other area that seems germane to me is to just talk about what impact this has on a person's heart. And there was one way in which this is framed that I found that I thought was really, really a great way of framing this particular problem, and or at least the question. And so what it asked was, let's see if I can find this. It was having to do with the question of contentment in what one has. And so let's see here. So I thinking about finish lines can help me move from coveting to, as I said, contentment. So if you think what coveting is wanting what someone else has and wanting it for myself, or at least being envious of what they have in such a way, and being dissatisfied with what I have. I guess in some ways that can be a good motivation to work harder, perhaps, or to be providing for your family. But in some cases, it's just, wow, they've got this, I don't, or they have that, I don't, and so is my heart built right if that's how I'm responding to that which is around me? Also, moving my heart from anxiety to trust so that I can save appropriately. Moving my heart from pride about what I've done or what I've earned or what I've saved or what I've built, to gratitude for having been in a position to build and earn and save that. And also, finally, I think probably from indifference to love, so that I'm in a position that I can give, not out of guilt, not out of duty, but give out of joy. So the heart part of this, I think, for me at least, is one of the single most compelling reasons to have this kind of evaluation.
Yeah, it is turning a lot of moments into positive moments, and I really like those kind of those concepts that you brought up, Erik. And when we discussed this earlier in the podcast, how your network sometimes can have a certain influence or have you reevaluate maybe where you are at. And a big thing they always they teach you in school is never always compare yourself, because everyone's going to be at different stages at different times. I think that was something that really hit home for me, and I think that is really important. And it is good to have a positive mentality, because again, that turning moment can always just be right around the corner, and you just got to keep moving forward, keep constantly reevaluating yourself, seeing what you can do, relying on the certain relationships that you built up. I think is an extremely important theme to really drive home, and it can go a long ways for you, and it can help create new relationships, can create new paths in your life, whatever it may be. And I think it's extremely important. And we understand that there are going to be some tougher moments. It's not always going to be positive. It's not always going to be great. But to always do your best and to always kind of construct your thoughts, your actions, in whatever way you can to make it a little bit easier or a little bit more forward thinking can really go a long way. And I think something else that's interesting is kind of maybe some shifts and some changes. Like I said, everyone's at different stages of your lifestyle, and for an instance too, this concept could be very intriguing for people that maybe didn't grow up with as much or were in a lower income bracket, but now they find themselves with a substantial amount of wealth or a great business. And that very shift is a very interesting perspective to look at, where you kind of see both ends of the income and wealth life, where you started out with not too much and now you've grown to have this, let's say, this very large nest egg. You kind of saw a lot of different stages, and that can really impact the relationship you have with money, and reevaluating that relationship and constantly looking at it, saying, how can I grow further? What should I change? What do I not like? What do the people around me think about it? Is extremely important. It can be very fruitful just to think about and look at. What do you think, Erik?
Yeah, no, I agree with that, Adrian.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to come back since you represent the hope of the future, right? Because you're considerably 35 years younger or so than I, and so when I think about putting myself back in my shoes when I was in my mid-20s, I was thinking about a lot of things. I was newly married. We were thinking about children. We hadn't yet purchased a home. We were going to spend some time in China, and so we knew that was on the horizon. And so there's a lot of things. I don't think wealth building and income limitations were part of my thought process at all. But I guess I would say to our listeners who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s out there, I would say don't take what we're saying here as some sort of I would say indictment of working hard, of earning well, of saving aggressively, of investing well and building wealth and building your career and building your income. I would encourage you along that way to not forget about being generous and have a generosity plan as part of your plan from day one, and be generous. But at the same time, do save and do build. But then there comes a point where hopefully you're going to have that income and that wealth reach a point where you can be radically generous, and where it will be for you just an enormous joy. I hope it will be a joy for you if that's you're looking out 10 and 20 and 30 and 40 years. That you'll have that to look forward to, but you won't save all of that generosity until the latter stages, that you'll enjoy the journey of generosity along the way.
Yeah, that's a great point, Erik. And the planning aspect is always good, that we like to kind of just discuss, always having a plan, or just have whatever it may be. It doesn't have to be a plan, but something where you can always reference and look back, I think is always important for growth. I think is really important. Erik, I think we covered a lot of great areas. Is there one that you think we haven't touched on, or one that, or some more research? I love some of the research that you brought up for our listeners today. It's been great. Is there anything else that we missed, or that you would want to discuss?
Well, I guess I will just say I'd like to point to a future conversation about how the role of business and how the role of a career can be in the same way, very in effect, generosity driven. Some of the most generous things that people can do is to deploy their phenomenal skills in one area of business or profession or other work. Deploy that in service of humanity. I mean, I just think about. I'm not singling this out, but it just is close to home. My wife was an occupational therapist for 22 years and helped a lot of people, and I think it would have been she worked for a lot of years with a lot of difficult situations. I think what a cool thing, what a joyful thing to be able to serve those people in that way. So I'd love to have another conversation at some point about the application of our skills and our energies in the direction of human flourishing, broadly speaking, and in business in particular, as a directionally toward human flourishing. So that's a subject, I guess, is important. I think the final thought that I have about this is, because most of this conversation, I would say, has broad application to people, whether or not their outlook is faith-based or if it's more just looking at it from a standpoint of a secular assessment or secular life philosophy. But I would say if you are a listener and faith is important to you, I think one final question that you want to ask in all of this is I would say a worship question. So we talked about the heart and the tuning of the heart, but our hearts, how do we want to have those tuned? What is it that we prize above all else? And if it's wealth and it's money, are we really on track there? And are we living in that sense in a way that's consistent with what we profess to be true about what we believe is the ultimate value and what we worship? So it has a faith. There's a very direct faith question for faith-oriented people in this entire question about wealth and income and giving.
Yeah, that's a great final thought, Eric, for our listeners to really think about. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you today. It's good just to take away or step away from some of the technical elements that we normally touch on, like taxes or investments or whatever it may be, to talk about something that's a little bit more inward. I think that was really great. And I really enjoyed having this conversation with you, Erik. It's definitely making me think about just the future and moving forward. I really liked it. Thank you for all the listeners that have joined us today. This has been another episode of the Retirement Lifestyle Show. We are on YouTube now, so if you want to, if you're more visual, we have YouTube videos going up weekly now. We're on Spotify, all the major streaming services, Apple Podcasts. We're on Anchor as well. So please check out our videos, like, subscribe, tell your network about it. Again, thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. This has been another episode of the Retirement Lifestyle Show.